improvise, adapt, and overcome.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carry On Podcast SITREP edition for the week of January 7th. I would love to tell you that it has been a slow news week, but I think we all know that that would be a lie. This has been one of the most exciting weeks in recent memory, certainly in a new year. This is the biggest and hottest news week that we could possibly have, which means how do we top it? Well, I don't know. We're going to have to tune in and see. Before we get into our subjects for this evening, a couple of things that I wanted to mention. First and foremost, I want to thank sincerely all of our Patreon subscribers for your dedication and your fidelity. It is tremendously humbling to me that you are enjoying this content enough to stakehold it, and it's very much appreciated. So I hope to be able to return that loyalty as much as possible from my end. And if your liver is suffering for my words along the way, then you're doing it right. And speaking of liver damage, tonight is a mezcal night because that's just the kind of news cycle that it's been. So I'm going to be enjoying some Madre mezcal from Oaxaca, Mexico. Fantastic artisanal mezcal. It's smoky, it's clean. And remember, if you're not a fan of mezcals, it's because you haven't tried the right one. They can be a lot. It is very much in your face. It is strong. All mezcals are tequilas. Not all tequilas are mezcals. It's made from a different part of the agave plant with a slightly different fermentation process that I've really come to enjoy. Try it on its own, of course, blended or mixed. Bloody Mary, for example. It's fantastic in a Bloody Mary. Do away with the vodka. Add in the mezcal instead. A little bit of spice on the rim. Bob's your uncle. Okay, enough about that. So, everyone's sitting down comfortably, glass in hand, because it is going to be a bumpy ride. I have thought long and hard about how I wanted to unpack the last week, what tone I wanted to take, what did I want to impart, what angles did I want to look at this. There's so many facets to what took place over the last week. I cannot cover them all possibly. There's just not enough time. It would be a 5-hour block. I want, though, to go once around the world, sort of bring everyone up to speed. There are other things taking place other than Venezuela, and I do want to briefly mention them. I want to bring us around the globe, and then along the way, we're going to hit Iran for just a quick update on what's taking place in that country. We're also going to talk a little bit about Greenland. I can't avoid it. It's so hyperbolic and yet so fascinating that this is in the forefront. We're also going to talk a little bit about Cyber Command because I think that is extraordinarily impactful in the broader context of what took place in Venezuela. And then we'll land on Venezuela in and of itself. So without further ado, what's been taking place globally while Venezuela was exploding, literally and figuratively? Well, obviously in the Western Hemisphere, Southcom is primarily focused on operations involving Venezuela, whether that's the interdictions on the maritime assets, sanctions enforcement, and of course the removal of Maduro himself. It has involved a lot of assets all the way from ground to space and everything in between. And we'll get to that in its own. Counterterrorism is always an ongoing endeavor for the United States military. Our foreign policy has never turned that off. Somalia and Syria saw strikes January 1st, last week, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Middle East, of course, is interesting. We've got a new drone capability that has been incepted in that area of responsibility, in that COVCOM. And then Europe. Europe is all about Ukraine, and that is still ongoing. I know that it has sort of taken page 2 in the news cycle with everything that's taken place in Venezuela, but make no mistake, Ukraine's still a thing. In fact, it is going to be even more impacted by U.S. actions in Venezuela. We'll talk about that in and of itself as well. Okay, let's see. At home, what's taking place domestically? Well, it's fairly quiet. We've had some Army National Guard troops that have been removed from Washington, D.C. They've been there since 2021, so they're out of the nation's capital. Guard posture changes, service readiness changes. Oh, Space Force. A little bit about Space Force. They have adapted and brought in a fitness standard. So, hey, welcome aboard, Space Force, to what the rest of the military has been doing for hundreds of years now. It's called physical fitness. Can't help poking a little bit at Space Force. I love you guys. I love your logo. Best thing ever. But you're still part of the Air Force. I know, it sucks. Marine Corps still gets teased for being part of the Navy. So you're going to get your due, Space Force. And I will continually make fun of you. At the same time, I love what you do. So looking at this a little more detailed in the Western Hemisphere, again, Venezuela, we're going to talk about that in its own segment. So I'm not going to really belabor the point here, other than to say that there was a really cool 2-week chase by a maritime force, Coast Guard, and Navy, both in pursuit of a black-flagged oil tanker. They watched it leave Iran last month, and they've been watching, actually even earlier than that, I want to say all the way back in June, if I remember correctly. It departed Iran under one name and under one flag, hit Venezuela, left Venezuela, and was pursued for about 2 weeks. There was a couple of abortive attempts to do a VBSS. That's a visit, board, search, and seizure by U.S. forces. That didn't go, and then eventually it did. But along the way, this ship dangles mariners off the side and paints a sloppy and hastily painted Russian flag. The Russians put a submarine as part of its escort. Of course, we see it. And they claim that they were under a Russian flag. We didn't give a shit. It was in international waters, and we took the ship down. And I think that's a pretty baller move. I love the message that it sends to Russia, which is a huge middle finger. They do this stuff all the time. They're petty lies. They're absolute thin cloak and dagger tactics, whether it's this or hundreds of other things that they've done. I think they need a little egg on their face. So I love it. I thought it was great. Sanctions against the dark fleet. Keep that going. Domestic Guard. Yep. So those folks were in the capital since, 2021, January 6th, 2021. Yeah, imagine that. So they finally got pulled back. And then, there's been some Guard demobilizations, Oregon reporting demobilizations of troops that were heretofore used to help support the southern border against immigration, right? And so, yeah. So let's go to the Middle East, talk about their operations with a little more clarity. Syria, you had Inherent Resolve. That was December 30th of last year. It included raids and airstrikes against ISIS targets. We also have that drone task force that I've spoken to you about. So that is a one-way drone strike force labeled Scorpion Strike. And it is CENTCOM's drone squadron using this Lucas system. I'm not too familiar with those systems yet. I'm hopefully going to be getting some more information on that, and maybe we can look to do a discussion about that in the future. But at the moment, it's low cost, rapidly fielded, and it's linked to one of this previous discussions about this accelerated acquisition directive. It is, as at least first blush, looking like it's achieving the goals that it was intended to achieve. I hope that this one-way attack squadron scales beyond CENTCOM and that these nodes become physical or cyber. So I want to see more of this. Just to sort of digress for a quick moment, so everyone's aware, we've got about a 2-year timeline. And then we're going to be in a shooting match with a really near-peer adversary. So these drones and the spin-off technologies that these allow, it's really important. The U.S. air defense is integrating in CENTCOM bilateral air defense with Bahrain. So that took place. That's part of a broader regional air defense architecture. There was a Kuwaiti-led counter-drone exercise called Sky Shield, which is highlights live fire and a lot of interoperability between us. And that involved a Patriot launch as well. So that was pretty cool. If we can bring online these counter UAS systems at the same time we're providing offensive drone capability, I think we're going to be in a good place. CENTCOM's also has the Gaza and its bailiwick. They are standing up this Civil Military Coordination Center, this CMCC, and it, according to them, facilitated 30,000 trucks into Gaza and expanded to 60 partners, all framing stabilization, logistics. So you're talking food, medicine, and all of the infrastructure that is needed towards stabilization and, God, I hope reconstruction in Gaza, because no matter what you might think about my ideological norms, at no point do I ever want to see another human being suffer, regardless of their background, age, color, race, creed, et cetera, et cetera. So I want there to be stability in Gaza. I am not looking for people to be starved to death, sleep out in the cold. So this is a good thing, and I am all for this. This is important. Moving over to AfricaCom, it is the normal status quo. So airstrikes in Somalia early January, so last week, January 1 to 3, 3 to 4, strikes against ISIS in Somalia, and then strikes against al-Shabaab. I love the name al-Shabaab, by the way. It always makes me think of food. I don't know why. Let's see. Indo-PACOM, which is Indo-Pacific, and then U.S. Forces Korea. DPRK had a ballistic missile launch in early January, and we're probably not going to see the end of that in the foreseeable future. I think that Korea is going to continue, North Korea anyways, it's going to continue to pursue offensive nuclear capabilities, and if not nuke, then it's going to be conventional. They want dialogue. They want to be taken seriously. And then I also feel that we are in a dangerous position once Kim Jong's successor takes over, because she is a nasty little bitch. And I don't use that word very often, but trust me, look into this young lady. She is going to ostensibly be Kim Jong-il's successor, and whatever. Okay. Europe is knee-deep in Ukraine. Guarantees that look a lot like NATO security guarantees. There's not going to be a Article 5 ability for Ukraine, but something very similar where the NATO entirety, its security umbrella, is going to provide some kind of security guarantee towards Ukraine as long as they don't officially join NATO, and a whole host of other things. And I'm not in the room, but yeah. They're also discussing a ceasefire. And in addition to that, it's U.S. push to have Europe and NATO take on more responsibility. And this is not new. We're talking about transitioning the bulk of what was previously a U.S.-centered area of responsibility, or at least burden, and shifting that over to the European Union, specifically the NATO countries that occupy the European Union, which, that's the bulk of us. You got a couple on the outskirts, Canada and Australia, but the bulk of NATO exists in the European Union, and it is the administration's belief that they should be carrying more of the responsibility for their part of the world, the Fulda Gap, a bunch of other areas, Norway. And yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I think we've got a lot of irons in the fire, and it does free us up strategically to do things elsewhere. So yeah, I think that's pretty good. Globally, we talked a little bit about Space Force. So new fitness tests and guidelines will be coming online. 2 assessments annually with specific events, and the fitness scores are going to enter the performance reviews, which all of the other services currently do. If you do well on a physical fitness test, it is a ingredient in the recipe to deciding whether or not you get promoted, whether you're eligible for promotion, whether you're competitive. So yeah, I think it's good. Hegseth talked about that at the Quantico Symposium a while back about physical fitness standards, and I think this is good, right? In case you're wondering, we are not just doing a one war posture. We're looking at a bunch of different things strategically for us. We're looking at deterrence by capability, we're talking about what that is a Ukraine security guarantees, Indo-Pacific missile responses, and then space procurement and readiness. In addition to that, you have that persistent counterterrorism, stability operations, and that just compresses or expands. There's no baseline for that. And then hemisphere coercion and maritime enforcement. Think Venezuela, and that carries real escalation and legitimacy costs. So there's your once around the world global look at what's taking place. I will update those individually when they, sort of fall on the to-do list. So let's kind of talk about. We're going to skip. I want to talk about Greenland first. Greenland. Interesting name too, by the way. They called it Greenland because it was actually full of ice, and they wanted people to immigrate and establish that. And they thought that if they called it Iceland, which I don't believe at the time was taken, but I may be wrong about that. But if they called it Iceland, that nobody would want to go. So they called it Greenland. It's kind of a false advertising because most of the time it's a frozen tundra. But hey, man, beautiful. Right now, Denmark and Greenland both are drawing an absolute hard red line. I love the fact that there are people that are literally having aneurysms over the U.S. even verbalizing that we're going to take over Greenland. But let's everyone just calm down for a moment and understand a couple of foundational realities. Trump says some fucked up shit. Okay? I don't know how else to articulate it better than that. He is all about ready, fire, aim. He does not think before he speaks. And there is a huge amount of things that come out of his mouth that's bombastic. So you got to pick your battles, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to becoming so apoplectic about the Trump administration. All right? So let's talk a little bit about Greenland and why I don't think that this is going anywhere. Okay? First and foremost, the European Union, in a rare show of 100% solidarity, got in front of this thing pretty gosh darn quick. All of the European Union has basically said, no, sovereign country, not issue. We're not discussing this. You're not taking over Greenland. The Prime Minister of the Danish Prime Minister, Frederick, I can't say it very well. Frederiksen? Yeah. He is basically given the U.S. a very, very blunt warning. A U.S. move against Greenland is going to rupture NATO's core premise. And I absolutely tend to agree. I think that if we did this, and again, I don't think it's going to happen, but let's just hit the hypothetical button for a moment. It would be the end of NATO. That's it. Full stop. NATO's done. Even if it didn't dissolve formally, its legitimacy would be undercut. We would hand the Soviet Union, Iran, North Korea, and then really to a lesser extent, China, the biggest win of the century. If you haven't been reading history, Putin hates NATO, absolutely hates it. It was part and parcel of why I think he invaded Ukraine in the first place, to completely take it off the table. He doesn't want NATO on his doorstep. He's already surrounded by 800 miles of NATO frontage. If we did this, it would be catastrophic. So while this overt rhetoric has been taking place, we quietly back in June of 2025 did something that moved Greenland into the U.S. Northcom's area of responsibility. And what that does is it signals that Greenland is part of the North American homeland defense geometry and not just Europe. And before it wasn't. So that's huge. Why do I think that Greenland is not going to be annexed? I don't even know what you would do. We haven't annexed something in modern times. I want to say the last thing we did was Hawaii or Puerto Rico, one of the two. Somebody will correct me, I have no doubt. But back in 1951, the U.S. and Denmark/Greenland had a defense agreement. It was NATO framed. And what it basically says is it gives the United States sweeping rights to operate defensive areas. So we can build bases there, we can launch planes, we can launch ships, we can run facilities, we can stage forces, move forces, coordinate with the Danish authorities explicitly without prejudice to Danish sovereignty. So we need Greenland for security. It's not the same thing as we need to run Greenland. We've got security, improper English. We have security agreements in place already. We don't need to annex Greenland. It does nothing for us. Do they have minerals there? Yes. They do. They do. And you would not be wrong if you didn't say, Brad, we just did this thing in Venezuela and it sure as hell seems like it was for no other reason than the oil. And I have to sheepishly agree with that statement, but I don't think that it's going to be the same thing with Greenland. The command shift here is something that I want people to remember. We move them from EUCOM or European Command into Northern Command, and that is a doctrinal signal. It treats Greenland as part of the Northern America defense infrastructure. It frames the change, at least on the Department of War's pressure, is that it changes it to strengthen the protection of the U.S. homeland against today's threat and emerging challenges. But you don't need to do that. We have a 2024 Arctic strategy that it emphasizes a monitor and respond approach, essentially remain tailored with forces in place, domain awareness, working with our partners to stabilize Arctic. Greenland's really important strategically because there's no way to attack the United States homeland using aerospace or anything that transits through the atmosphere. So intercontinental ballistic missiles, things of that nature, without triggering early warning systems that are located on Greenland. I mean, its location is key. So we definitely need Greenland from a strategic viewpoint. It sits adjacent the Greenland, Iceland corridor, which is one of North America's classic maritime choke regions. And this is where it's important. But taking it over, I just don't see it. Okay, again, you've got minerals, PFD, moving on. You don't need them. I think if we take over Greenland, if we make an overt move to take Greenland, if we look at, either whether it's through coercion, whether it's through force, NATO's done. We're done. And you give Russia a huge win. I think that's pretty much all I want to talk about Greenland. There's a couple of other layers to the Greenland piece, but the bottom line is that we have everything we need already in place through treaties, through agreements, through NATO structure. So this does nothing for us. I mean, it absolutely does nothing for us. And if it's just baseless imperialism, colonialism, then we've already lost. Because then the United States no longer holds the ideals that we are supposedly espousing. And it's game over. We're already in a very precarious moral area. And I just don't think it's going to happen. Denmark, Greenland, and the European Council president has already asked for direct lines of communication with Rubio, forcing as soon as possible to meet with them. And it looks like as of right now, that's going to be next week. And this is important. I think this story will die down. I don't think that the Greenland topic is going to be in the news beyond January. I just don't. So that's my opinion. The thing that worries me when we start talking about things like this is I don't have an issue with the Trump administration, with the United States throwing shade on the United Nations. I don't think the United Nations is very efficient. I don't think they're very impactful. I don't think that the UN Charter represents the interests, goals, beliefs, and culture of the United States. And I am not for globalism. I am not for a homogenized world. I get that New York just elected a socialist mayor who talks extensively about homogenization, about collectivism. I don't think it's going to work. It doesn't work micro and it doesn't work macro. So I don't understand why people think that the United Nations has a future globally. But yeah, I mean, I'm willing to let the experiment continue to run its course. Here's what I'm not willing to entertain. When Trump casts disparaging comments about NATO's value, while tensions with Greenland are rising, it's NATO's purpose. There's a lot of history when it comes to the creation of NATO, why it's here, what its true purpose is. It was really created to keep Europe from having another war again. It was really to keep them from fighting amongst themselves as much as it was an existential threat against the coalition, the Union. So to that end, it's very effective. A couple of little redheaded stepchildren like Turkey, who I don't know why we let in NATO. Actually, that's not true. I do know why we let Turkey in NATO, because they have massive strategic importance. But wow, I've digressed and I apologize. Let's bring it back. Greenland. Greenland is not just a geographic issue. It's about an alliance identity issue. And then it's about our stability as a partner, as a United States partner, as a member of NATO, but beyond that, as that bedrock of a lot of Western democracy. I mean, it is the United States. We're the 800-pound gorilla in the room. So I don't think anything is going to happen. I think there's going to be most likely heated talks, rhetoric spikes. I think that Rubio and Denmark are going to have face-saving dialogue. I don't think there's going to be anything that moves forward. And I think it's probably going to stabilize very much like it is right now. I think they may improve some of the agreements that we have in place with Denmark over what we can and cannot do in Greenland, basically control without ownership. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. All right. I've beat that horse fairly well. Let's talk about Iran. Let's talk about Iran. Wow. Yeah. So some of the things that I spoke about previously have come to fruition. Labor did join the students and the merchants in the strike, but not across the board, only in certain sectors. And Tehran was very careful to keep that from happening. So they flooded a lot of security forces around the oil pipelines, around the processing, the extraction, the derricks, to keep those workers in line. But you did have labor strike elsewhere in the country. Now, as of now, this thing has gotten legs. It's grown. You have a lot more people shouting death to Khomeini. You have a lot more people that are mobilizing in the streets, and it has occupied a lot more of the country than it has previously. And as was to be expected, you have a lot more people now dead. The last time we talked about this, it was low. It was, less than 10 people had died. Now we're up to 32. 4 of those, I think last count was 32. 4 of those are children under the age of 18 at least. 2 of those at last I saw were security forces, and they're cracking down. So the gloves are off. No longer does the administration, it's not really administration, they are no longer allowing people to protest. So they're going out there in force, and they are absolutely clamping down. 1,200 arrests so far. Large section of Iran is now under protest. And it is not helping that the United States is offering to go in and intervene. Don't do that. All you do is give a target for the government to point to and say, this is all outside influence. They're already doing it. Don't make it worse. And then from a practical standpoint, come on, dude. What are you going to do? You going to fly helicopters into Iran? And what? Put National Guard troops on the street to help the protesters? You going to extract people? You can't do a Maduro snatch and grab against Iran. Under what context? I mean, you could. I'm not saying that it's not logistically feasible, but it's just not going to happen. I mean, I just don't think that we're in that edition of the Twilight Zone yet. So by adding comments like that publicly, you're just giving ammunition to the regime. So anyways, the U.S. has condemned the violence, condemned the arrests, condemned the deaths, obviously, and not just the United States, but globally, the diaspora has, the European Union has, and pretty much everybody. Yeah. And all of this has nuclear sanctions and the International Atomic Energy Administration in the background. There's a lot that could happen with this protest to make it worse, but I certainly stand by my earlier statement that this is not in any way going to cause regime change. It's not. What could the U.S. do instead of go in and directly help the protesters out? Well, the best course of action for the United States in this situation is essentially to harden our perimeter, which is most likely what's going to happen. So bases in that part of the world have more air and missile defense. We increase our ISR platforms, not necessarily in quantity, but maybe in frequency, right? Protective postures for bases and embassies in that part of the world. Look at maritime overwatch. I mean, that strait where Iran has that waterway is extraordinarily contested. There has been numerous instances of ships who have said that they were on outside of Iran's waterways. They have said that they're inside. And, when you have a weapon systems pointed at you, it's really hard to argue that you're right and they're wrong. So there has been instances where vessels were taken over claiming that they were on the Iranian side. But yeah, so I would imagine that our response during these protests and the rhetoric that we're espousing should be, we just force protection measures go up, right? We could, if we wanted to, do a precision retaliation if U.S. forces are hit, but we're going to have to wait until that happens first. I don't think we're going to preemptively strike Iran. I could be wrong. Like I said, it's been a very interesting week, so there's a lot of precedents that have gone out the window, but I don't think it's going to happen. Let's see. Expanded naval presence is always part and parcel of our response when something like this takes place. We increase interdictions, escort operations, and I think Iran knows that we're going to shit stomp them if they try something that is beyond just lobbing some drones into air bases like they've done before. And I mean, this is a long-standing U.S. lever in the Gulf Strait dynamic. It's much more likely if Tehran tries to externalize their domestic violence and they try regional disruptions, which is commonly what they've done. But I think that that's more reaction-based than overt on our part. I want to reemphasize, these are mostly my opinions, but they're heavily weighted in fact, in history, in precedent, in military doctrine, but also military footprint. You have a better understanding of what the United States is capable of doing if you understand what assets are stationed globally. What is in the Middle East? What are our capabilities? What force can be brought to bear? Well, I mean, in many ways, we have global reach, pretty much do anything we want anywhere, but are we going to use it? Are we going to use it to save protesters in Iran? I don't think so. But yeah, the rhetoric exists. Trump has publicly threatened intervention if Iran kills peaceful protesters. Hold on, newsflash and spoiler alert. They've killed fucking protesters, quite a few of them, as they have many, many times before. Direct interaction, direct intervention, it risks rapid escalation into a regional war. It puts U.S. bases at immediate risk, which Iran is already telegraphing they're going to do, and can unify factions inside Iran that are fractured against an external enemy. You don't want to do that. Let the family fight internally. Don't attack the family. That's going to galvanize them, and then they're just going to off-ramp the protest against us, and this whole thing is drowned out. It's going to backfire. I don't think anything is going to happen with Iran and the United States kinetically. I think it's going to be rhetoric. I think it's going to be a hard push to call for calm, call for peaceful protests. But unless the Iranian Republican Guard Corps fractures, as I've said before, or the elites fracture from Khomeini, it's just going to be a long protest. I mean, it's different. It changes things. The Iranian theocracy is going to take a pretty robust hit because the fear is gone. I think that's what really tastes different about this protests compared to all of the previous ones. The Iranian people are no longer necessarily scared. Despite their lack of fear, the Iranian government is cracking down. They're cracking down hard. They're now saying no leniency for those that support the unrest, explicitly now framing it as if you are protesting, you're aiding the enemy, which is the United States and Israel. And that's a signal that they're moving from contain and bargain, which is what they were doing before the last time I talked about this, to punish and deter. So yeah, that's step one. The other thing that they're doing is preemptive action by the military. They are threatening preemptive military action against the protesters, and that's directly tied to Trump's comments. I mean, words matter. As I've said, Trump is bombastic. He says wild and outlandish things, and most of the time, I take it with a grain of salt. But words matter. And Iran loves to hang their hat on just comments like this. So they are warning retaliation. There has been some pretty egregious actions on behalf of the Iranian security forces, police, and military both. They went into a hospital in the Lam, 2 L's, Lam Hospital. Yeah. And they arrested protesters that were there in hospital rooms seeking medical attention. So that's quite a great human rights violation right there, right? The people that were hospitalized were then arrested. So they were in the middle of receiving medical care. And yeah, they additionally went into a university and arrested protesters. And that has not something that they had typically done before. They usually tend to leave that one alone. So yeah, I don't think that the situation in Iran is going to get necessarily worse, but how do you determine what worse is? It certainly could get better. Could it get worse? It's not going to get more violent than it already is. I don't think that you're going to see anything that fractures the regime, because at the end of the day, these people that are cracking skulls, they want a job. They want stability. They want to be in power. If regime change takes place, they're most likely out on the streets where the protesters are in the first place. So the roles will be reversed. They don't want that. It's in their best interest to maintain status quo, and they're going to do that with extraordinary prejudice against the protesters. So, yeah, I don't see this thing as being regime change, but yeah, it does fracture the theocracy in the future. So, okay. I want to talk about Venezuela. I know that's what everybody wants me to talk about. And man, I want to talk about it too. So let's talk about it. There's so many facets, so many facets to this. The way, from the way that it was planned and coordinated under secrecy for months without any leaks, extraordinary, right? To the way that it was reported by the Pentagon press pool, to the way that we used tools that we've never talked about publicly before. Well, that's an absolute. I don't want to speak in absolutes. We typically don't. We typically don't talk about Cyber Command, and they had a pretty heavy hand in this. The angle of how quickly and decisively we bypassed two near-peer adversaries' radar and surface-to-air missile systems. Completely bypassed them. Like they weren't even there. Now that's pretty fucking ninja right there, if I do say so myself. And I've seen a few ninja things in my life. That's cool. That gives egg on the face of Russia, it gives egg on the face of China, and it gives both of them pause about what the U.S. capabilities truly are. We'll talk about that. There's the moral angle. You know, does the U.S. have the moral high ground here? I think if the administration had framed it differently, easy win. Easy win, my opinion, right? If the administration had simply said, hey, this guy is a bastard and he's a horrible record of human rights. By all accounts, there's drugs, but don't make that the focus of effort. You sell it as democracy. He was an illegitimately elected president. He has a horrible human rights record. A lot of poverty, a lot of people in jail, a lot of people that have been taken off the street and are missing if you speak out against the government. And we want to bring democracy to the country of Venezuela and allow them to rule under their own flag. That would have gotten you so much more mileage instead of basically saying, yeah, we invaded Venezuela because they have the largest oil reserves on the planet. Dude, don't talk about that openly, right? People already think that about the United States as it is. As far as most of the world is concerned, that's the modus, that's like the casus belli of why we've gone into most of the countries that we have. So I just wish that it had been framed a little bit differently. And I also, I don't want to make this about politics. I truly don't, but you can't have politics without foreign policy, and we can't have military action without foreign policy. So they're all inextricably linked. But if the administration, specifically Trump, would sort of temper down some of his comments, not spike the football each and every time, I think he'd be more dangerous. I think the rest of the world, if he sort of quietly wielded power, would be scared shitless of him. I believe that. Because you don't brag, you don't spike the football, you just go in, you snatch a dude. Yeah, we did it. The country of Venezuela deserves democracy, and this guy was a bastard. So yeah, we did it. Next question. And that's it. And that's it. And I think, wow, that would really freak people out. I think that would carry weight. I think you'd punch way above your weight. Okay. Again, not what people want to talk about. This was an incredibly complex military operation that was executed so simply. And it involved, as I said, every single resource that the United States has, from maritime to aviation, to special operations forces, to conventional forces, to cyber command, to U.S. Space Command. It involved military. It involved intelligence community, both NSA and CIA. I'm not telegraphing what their involvement was, mostly because I don't know. But you'd be foolish not to think that the intelligence community did not have a heavy hand in this, especially considering that the administration telegraphed that the agency was in Venezuela last year actively working against the regime, which I was like, bro, you're not supposed to do that. But he did it. Okay, so holistically, all of these components. And afterwards, the administration acknowledged all of them, which is also unusual. You don't typically want people to know what our cyber capability is. That's the one that I was most intrigued by. I want to talk about the other stuff, and I will, I promise you. But I want to sort of take an off-ramp here and just briefly talk about cyber command, because the administration, and not specifically Trump, it might have been another press release somewhere else, but we acknowledged the use of cyber warfare in this strike. And if you really look at the kinetic effects, our adversaries can derive a lot from that. And I don't know if there's a lot of people that cringed when that was acknowledged, because we're supposed to keep that very, very hush hush. Not that we don't do it, not that we don't have it, but you don't want to say what it is that we're capable of. And a little known fact, it's only happened a couple of times when we spiked the nuclear centrifuges in Iran using the Stuxnet virus, and it later came out that that was U.S. Cyber Command, or at least our code. And there was a couple of other high-profile instances, but not many. Meanwhile, North Korea has a hacking factory. Russia has a hacking factory. China sure as hell does. And China's is military. Pure and simple. There's an entire branch of the PLA that is designed to hack foreign adversaries. And the U.S. does it too. We just don't advertise it. And the U.S. Cyber Command it's an interesting organization. Not a lot is talked about when it comes to our command and control, our cyber command, but just wanted to briefly talk about that and how they dovetailed so nicely into the extraction of Maduro. They do a lot of, let's call it hunt forward operations, hunt forward deployments, where individuals under U.S. Cybercom go out into the world and they detect, find and detect weaknesses and then potentially exploit them, or at least have them in the operational plan to be exploited in support of a thing, right? So cybercom, or I should say cyber warfare, really, it's not a self-licking ice cream cone. They don't exist just to exist. They exist as an enabler. But cyber is its own terrain, much like artificial intelligence is becoming its own terrain. You have land, you have sea, you have air, you have space, and you have cyber, and now AI. So in some ways, that's kind of changing. But at least today, their job is an enabler. And that may be an oversimplification, but let's just go with it for the moment. A little bit about Cyber Command. It's not, the U.S. Cyber Enterprise is not one chain of command, so it's a lot. U.S. Cybercom is DoD, but when you talk about our cyber enterprise, it's multiple chains. It's Department of Defense or Department of War, like whatever. It's Department of Homeland Security. It's Department of Justice. It's the intelligence community, which is a lot. It's U.S. Department of State, it's U.S. Department of Treasury, and it's the White House, and all have forced coordination. U.S. Cyber Command, at least as what's publicly confirmable, they do persistent defend forward engagements. So that's open testimony is described at least 85 deployments to 30 countries, encompassing 24 hunt forward missions in 2024 alone. And this is open source. I'm not giving anything that's not supposed to be out there. And they've covered every geography. And the component command, U.S. Cyber Command, which is its own component command, has an area of responsibility. And the logic is simple. They find an adversary, they find access to that adversary and the tooling needed early, and then they either burn it down or disclose defensively useful indicators so that when a force like what happens in Venezuela is put together, there's capabilities, there's a cap set there. Department of Defense Information Network, it remains a continuous combat support element. So it's not just a supporting effort, even though that's kind of how I think about it. That's how my brain works, but it's a prerequisite for everything else. You can't have C2, you can't have logistics, you can't have ISR, you can't have fires without U.S. Cybercom and their DoD information network. It doesn't exist. They have not done a lot of offensive operations. We've done a couple. Stuxnet is one. There was one in Russia that took place that brought down a trolling farm, especially when it came time for the 2018 presidential. There was a lot of anti-Russian cyber operations to get them to stop interfering with our elections. And, they have. But a lot of these things are done very defensively in nature. We don't engage in a lot of offensive cyber the same way that, again, North Korea, Russia, and China do. The chain of command it's interesting. You've got, at least as far as the Title 10 goes, you have the president, then the Secretary of Defense, and then the commander. The commander of U.S. Cyber Command is a dual hat individual. The commander of U.S. Cyber Command is also the director of the NSA. And there's always been a belief that it should be dual hatted so that it is both Title 10, Title 50. It is both civilian oversight and military. You have a little blend there. It's currently sitting vacant. Last I was tracking, I don't know if they've actually confirmed there was an acting, but I don't know if they've confirmed an actual director. I think the last guy was either relieved or left on his own. But U.S. Cyber Command, like I said, it's a functional combatant command. It employs forces through the individual service components. So the Army has a cyber command, or a cyber unit, I should say. The Navy does, 10th Fleet Cyber. Marine Forces Cyber, obviously Marine Corps, and then Air Force, 16th Air Force is their cyber forces. You also have a standalone government cyber national mission force. You have DoD Cyber Defense Command, which includes Department of Defense, IN, and then Coast Guard, DHS. And at least in this construct, they fall under U.S. Cyber Command. So there's a lot. They all have distinct authorities, which in a way is part of the problem. U.S. cyber needs a streamlined, unified command, and you have a lot of disparate commands. And when priorities align, the system is very powerful, but when they diverge, you have a lot of latency, deconfliction, overhead, and you have gaps. And that's where our enemies can exploit some weakness. But anyways, it's a very interesting ecosystem. Military cyberspace operations is primarily the jurisdiction of U.S. Cyber Command. So anything that is supporting the military, involved with the military, and a military enabler to include CCMD integration and DoD IN all under U.S. Cyber Command. So dual hat. You have the NSA. They're part of the intelligence community, but they're also part of the Department of Defense when it comes to cyber. They do signals intelligence. They do enabling. Department of Homeland Security, civilian, federal. You have, again, DOJ, law enforcement. Everybody understands that. I don't want to run through that. And they all report, at least in the Cyber Command, to the Secretary of Defense, who reports directly to the U.S. president. So I think that U.S. cyber power is very real, but it's governed across multiple chains. And I think people would like one chain. I think that it would probably be much more effective as a tool, as a weapon, if it was. But, they'll work it out. They'll work it out. Anyways, U.S. Cyber Command. So that's kind of a little bit about them. They had a pretty big role. They had a pretty big role in Venezuela. And so what was that role? Well, I'm glad that you asked. Russia has surface-to-air missile systems in Venezuela. They have a couple of different systems. From what I was reading, they have contractors on the ground to help run those. They have integrated into the command and control of the Venezuelan military architecture, but they still depend heavily on Russian contractors to help maintain them. And they had, again, I read 300 on the ground. Interesting. And that in and of itself, because we had to call Russia and let them know that we were about to strike these systems so that we didn't inadvertently kill Russian citizens. And this takes place all the time. I mean, it took place in al-Assad's backyard when we were in that country running air sorties. We would call the Russians ahead of time and say, yeah, we're about to blow up this base. The Russians wouldn't show up for work. Now, I don't know what the amount of time was between, the phone call and the strike, but not a single Russian contractor was killed or injured in any of these. So I can only assume that there was enough. The Russians had the surface-to-air missiles that were, as far as I have read, they're tier 1 systems. I mean, they were supposedly their best stuff, and we breezed right through them. How did we do that? How were we able to turn those off? Did we turn them off at the command and control node? Did we turn them off elsewhere? I don't know. I can theorize about a couple of ways that was used, but I would venture to guess that Cyber Command had a hand in some of it. I'm willing to bet my paycheck, modest that it is, that Cyber Command turned the lights out, because once the strike took place, or I should say leading up to the strike, the country went black. They blacked it out. That's not like some guy was held at gunpoint at the power plant because you knew a guy and turned the lights out. No, that was electronic. That was digital. That was cyber. That was an offensive capability. So in addition to the Russian surface-to-air missile sites, you also had Chinese. You had JYL-1s and JYL-1As and JY-11 Bravos. You're like, great, cool, don't care. I get it. Those are radar. Without those radar systems, the Russian surface-to-air missile systems have reduced capability. So you had Chinese long-range air surveillance radar capabilities, and those were turned off too. They were struck. They didn't do their job. There wasn't a single aircraft that was put out. And so those defenses rapidly neutralized or bypassed via multiple pathway creations, whether that's electronic jamming, which definitely based off of the presence of some of the aircraft that were overhead. That's absolutely part and parcel of it. But they hit 100 targets. There were a couple of these systems out there. I read $50 billion worth of hardware. So, you're going to have a couple of different C2 disruptions. You're going to have to There are claims that China had a anti-stealth radar, but it's not proven. Russia right now and China are both sweating bullets because if remember, there's ostensibly no U.S. military forces on the ground currently in Venezuela. There's no occupation pending. All it is a lot of blockade and a lot of military over the head and a big threat. But Russia and China are shitting kittens because if it does get to the point where there is a pro-Western government in there, we're going to get access to that hardware. And then China and Russia have some of their absolute top-of-the-line, cutting-edge systems in U.S. hands. And it's about time because China has for too long reverse-engineered our technology. They steal it. It's given to them through, traders, or they buy it through an intermediary and then they have it and they reverse engineer it. So I'm all about this. It's incredible the way that we cut through this layered surface to air defense system using a combination of aircraft jamming, space, cyber. And we struck them. So I think it's great. The other thing that took place was the blockade that has prevented oil from leaving the country of Venezuela. Most of the oil that Venezuela produces turns into diesel fuel, and a lot of that production takes place along the Gulf Coast. Venezuela had so much oil that they could not get out of that country that they were storing it on ships in the harbor or just off the coast. And all of that oil is on its way to the United States, 30 to 50 million barrels. It's not all about the oil. Like I said, oh God, there's so many layers to this. And I'm trying to keep a coherent thread, but there's just so many different facets to this. Everyone is saying it's about the oil, and it is, but it's not about the oil in and of itself. It's about what the oil can do and what it can't do. We could potentially control the largest oil deposit on the planet. Now, whether or not we should, whether or not that's right, whether or not that's just, I don't care. I don't want to talk about that yet, or if at all. I don't know yet. But leave that one aside. If we do, and we flood the market with oil, it lowers the global oil cost. If we drive it below or at $50 a barrel, you cut Russia out at the knees. Because don't forget, they're making an assload of money off of oil sales. That is, their resources are natural gas, oil, a couple of other things, but that's the big two. And if the global price of oil falls below $50 a barrel, you take a boatload of money out of the pockets of the Russian government, which is using that money to fund an ill-gotten war in Ukraine. So you can talk about resources and you can talk about, well, the oil companies are just getting rich and this was nothing more than a petty grab for profit. I mean, maybe. God, I still can't bring myself to be that cynical. I have to believe that there's more to it than this. I have to. So I think that it is, all of this diesel oil is going to Gulf Coast refineries. It goes into the U.S. economy. It also trickles down to the Venezuelan economy. We're not taking everything. We're skimming off the top. I get it. I understand the words coming out of my mouth on what that sounds like. It's like an episode of The Sopranos. There's going to be some kickbacks to the United States. A lot of it's going to flow into the Venezuelan country. What they do with it is unknown, and there's just no way to know for sure. The oil is a factor. I get it. but I don't know as if it is the only factor. This had been planned for a year. It goes all the way back to January of 25 when we did cross-training with the Coast Guard and the Joint Task Force South for counter-narcotics and maritime domain awareness. And we just continually refined interoperability, and we continue to plan. They built mock-ups of Maduro's palace. Special forces trained. We relocated forces into the Caribbean. I mean, all the signs were there. All the telegraphing was there. I did not, in my wildest dreams, think that all of these movements of assets and resources would lead towards an incursion into Venezuela and the rapid extrication of its, I don't know, dictator, government, president, I don't know what to call the gentleman. And all of the steps that took place September to November of 25, an uptick in all these lethal strikes against these alleged drug boats, narco terrorists. You had Venezuelan airspace closed after the cartel was designated as a foreign terrorist organization. Remember, Congress was debating the War Powers Act during that time in November, whether the president had the authority to go in and strike these vessels in the first place. But I don't know. And that's still being adjudicated. December 11th, 2025, we seized that oil tanker off of Venezuela. Remember that? And that was a joint Department of Justice, FBI, HSI, and Coast Guard with DoD support. And that's and there's another interesting facet to this. Ordinarily, you have a military operation or you have a police operation or a law enforcement operation. And this was blended. Completely blended. It was 100% under the guise of a law enforcement action, but with a heavy spine of Department of War. There was an amphibious readiness group off the coast. You had Marines. You have anytime aircraft fly, you have search and rescue, CSAR. You have JSOC involvement. All of these different military operations. You had intelligence agents on the ground laying the foundation for all of this, getting assets and resources in place. But it was billed as a law enforcement action where Maduro was under arrest and his rights were read and he was extracted back to a criminal court to face charges. And that in and of itself is unprecedented in some ways. You look back at Manuel Noriega in Panama, purely military. Grenada, purely military. I don't think, at least in recent memory, I can think of a time that we've had anything like this before where military and law enforcement worked so closely together, but it was a operation flagged as a law enforcement operation. It's wild. I don't know what comes next. I understand that there is a tremendous amount of consternation over the legality of this, over the morality of this, over the ethics of this, and then all the second and third order effects, some of which we've talked about. It signals to Russia and China that we are not to be fucked with, that we can come into your home in the middle of the night and snatch you from your bed and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. But at the same token, should we? Should we? I don't know. You can debate that one over another glass of mezcal if you wish. I'm not going to give you the answer because I don't know as if there is a crisp and clean answer. The second and third order effects into Colombia. You've seen the protesters in Colombia, the threat that President Trump made towards the fall of that country. The president of Colombia joining protesters in the streets saying, Yanks go home. Look at the effects that it's having in Cuba. 32, if I remember correctly from reading, maybe somewhere around 32, 35, Cuban intelligence officers were killed. or at least Cuba is claiming that they were theirs. Cuba has provided secret intelligence training to Venezuela. It is, their secret police, their whatever the case may be. And a lot of Cuba's training and people on the ground is what many people are saying kept Maduro in power, because the secret police had worked themselves into the military. It has worked themselves into the government. And basically, you were always being watched. So 32 of those fuckers are gone. I have no idea by whom and what the circumstances were, but it'll come out eventually. All of this is a great backdrop for a fantastic Hollywood movie. So I want to get Michael Bay on the phone. Let's get this thing up and running right away. This, I want to see summer 27. Let's make it happen. So Cuba is looking at this with shock. They're counting down the days until they fall. As I said, Colombia. And there's a couple of other ones. I don't necessarily think that this is in any way foreshadowing for more to come. I don't think that we're going to suddenly start knocking down Latin American countries like dominoes and putting puppet governments in. I don't think we're going to start demanding that they capitulate and give us first right for all their minerals. But if you would ask me in December if I ever thought that we would be launching a strategic raid into the country of Venezuela to take its dictator, I would have said no. I gave you a 30 to 60 day timeline for just incursions on land, strikes against drugs, but not this. Speaking of strikes against drugs, I apologize for the stream of consciousness, but that's kind of what this topic demands. Mexico. Take a look at the president of Mexico and our thinly veiled threat of fix the drug problem or we will. Now, when it comes to that topic and that topic alone, I'm all for it. I would love nothing more, and I've said this publicly before, for the U.S. Special Operations Command and all of its enablers, and I mean everything, go have fun in Mexico, and we'll see you in a year. You have an unlimited budget. You can do whatever you want. Destroy the drug production capability in Mexico for the next 100 years. Just get rid of it. I think it'd be great. I don't necessarily think that that's ever going to come to fruition, but that is yet one more country that is in the sight picture of the administration and feel the second and third order effects of what we just did in Venezuela. I don't know if we had the legality for this, and I have heard on both sides, we do or we don't. I think it really comes down to political leanings. It depends on what television network you turn on, whether you're going to get the answer that you want. I don't want to throw red meat. That's not my thing. So I'm not going to tell you one way or another. What I'm going to do is just look at the mechanics of the raid, what we did, what we accomplished, what it could mean for the future. I think that the message that it sends to China is a powerful one. I have spent so much of my free time learning about what a conflict in 2027 with China over Taiwan is going to look like, but more importantly, what the next day is going to look like. The conflict, it's somewhat academic. What is the world going to look like when it's over? And that is the truly frightening thing. I'm not saying that, with nuclear, I'm not saying that, not chem, not bio. It's just the world is going to be fractured, and I think it's going to look very, very differently. And I think that the message that this sends to China is a powerful one. It says we're not going to be trifled with. We have capabilities that far eclipse anything that you have seen prior. So all morality aside, all ethics aside, legality aside, you look at this thing purely from a military operation, absolutely flawless. And the fact that nothing was leaked ahead of time is incredible. Probably because it was Delta that did it. sorry, I can't help but take a slight dig at the SEALs. They are the writers of their own press release. Delta, a little quieter. So yeah, I thought that was great. Are we going to strike again? I don't know. My feelings are we are not. I think that is pretty much over. I think it is now going to be a maritime operation resulting in a reduction of all of these complete elimination, really, not a reduction, a complete elimination of all of these black fleet ships that were transporting oil both to China and a couple of other places. I think those are gone, which is a good thing, right? I think that it is going to result in some weakening of some of the satellite countries that had less than reputable governments, i.e. Cuba, possibly Colombia, but then Colombia is not really a illegitimate government. And although it is the largest producer of cocaine on the planet, and there is a lot of corruption in that part of the world, but I don't necessarily know that it is the U.S.'s job to fix it. I don't necessarily know that the Monroe Doctrine includes, or that Dunroe Doctrine, as it's been called lately, includes neo-imperialism or neo-colonialism is really what it is. I don't know. Yeah, wow. So many things to think about and so many things to talk about and so many things to digest. And we will definitely be hitting this topic again because this is not a short news cycle. This is here to stay. This is the new landscape. We did a thing and it has massive repercussions. I love talking about the tech that was involved. I enjoy talking about the assets that were brought to bear, but those are really an extension of foreign policy. And so the more cerebral topic to talk about is, what does this do to foreign policy? How does this shape the United States' role the next 5 to 10 years? I think it's going to have profound implications. We talk about Greenland. We've spoken about other countries. What is it going to do? What is it going to mean? What are the impacts? And is it making us safer? Is the United States of America safer on January 8th, January 7th, January 9th because of what took place? So think about that as we come to the bottom of the glass of our mezcal. Are we safer? I don't know. I think maybe in some ways we are. I think in other ways, maybe not. But time will tell. And as it does, I will be here to narrate the entire proceedings, as always. So, before we bring this to a close, let's weigh in with my producer and good friend, Jason, to see if there's any additional questions that he has for me to discuss or anything that I might have left out, which, let's be honest, with a topic this rich, I probably left something out. All right, Jason, what questions do you have?
Well, I don't, it is such a massive topic, everything that's going on. It's kind of, where do I start? There's something that did happen today, which I thought was interesting because Trump is freaking out about it and he's slandering all of the Republicans who are involved. But there was a U.S. Senate advanced a war powers resolution to block the U.S. military force against Venezuela. And the resolution was passed like 52 to 47 vote, long party lines. Republicans largely voted against the resolution and Democrats were unanimous in voting for it. So,
right.
But he went on to bash Susie Collins from Maine and Todd Young from Indiana and Rand Paul from Kentucky and Hawley from Missouri and Murkowski from Alabama all voted for the resolution. So that'll be an interesting thing to watch
Yes,
moving
agreed.
forward, because he usurps Congress, which he will.
Yeah. I think Congress is going to push back. I think that's one of the things we're going to see over the next coming months, depending on how the rest of this goes. If it doesn't die off, there's been a lot of discussion about Congress retaking its place in the checks and balance of the United States democracy. So, yeah,
that'll be interesting to watch. I do think also a thing to note is, as you were saying about like, how does this translate into foreign policy and moving forward? Because it's a very specific kind of policy to snatch and grab,
it is.
The dictator, which, I ultimately don't have a problem with at all. And not that that is even relevant, what my opinion is, but I do think it is worth noting it's the first time in history that the U.S. government has gone into a place for ostensibly for the resources like oil, and not lied about it, which is kind of refreshing.
Yeah. Well, it is refreshing, and you and I had this conversation offline. It is amazingly refreshing to be looked at straight and go, oh yeah, it was oil. But I'm like, really, bro? Really? I love the honesty, but this is the one time, and I can't believe I'm saying this. Fucking lie to me. Tell me it wasn't about the oil, because if it's just about the oil, I feel kind of,
dirty.
I don't know, man.
like you need a shower.
Lie to me about it. Yeah. Like I thought we didn't do this kind of stuff, man. This is not the 19th century.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing about that is he stated in an interview, which I thought was really comedic, that he talked to oil companies before the invasion and after the invasion, but he neglected to talk to Congress.
Yeah. And you kind of have to understand that you got what you got when it came to Trump. And it, when it comes to politics, I make no bones about it. I am a Republican. I vote Republican. It is my party. And whatever failures or ugliness my party has, I'm a part of it. I own it. But you get what you get when it comes to Trump. And this is what the people voted for. And he's not going to sugarcoat it. This is exactly what I expected when the man came into office, and we're all just along for the ride. But to your point, it is incredibly unilateral, because most of the time our administrations, you have a balance of power. You have the legislative, you have the executive, you have the judicial, and each one plays a role. And executive and legislative are supposed to, under this agreement, talk to one another when you're going to do something like this. And he didn't. And then they said they didn't want any leaks. Okay, you're probably right about that, because I think if you had told Congress, it probably would have been leaked. But, you tell them, we did the same thing with the Osama bin Laden raid. You don't tell them right away. You tell them like 2 hours before the whole thing's supposed to go down, or you just bring the Gang of Eight in and you just tell them.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you look at Venezuela as like how it was being presented as narco-terrorism and all of that and its justification, but your point of Mexico, I think, is they're the ones that are really killing Americans, and that's where at scale, and that's where all of the the fentanyl precursors are going into from China, and that's where all of that manufacturing is really happening. That's getting into America is coming from there. So
right.
I think it would be amazing to set, SOCOM, give them free reign and see how that, as you were mentioned, see what happens in a year, because
I mean, we talk about the war on drugs, and it's kind of like a media friendly soundbite. But dude, I'm serious. If you want a war on drugs, let's have a fucking war on drugs. Let's really declare war on drugs. If it's a fentanyl problem, if it's a cocaine problem, a poppy problem, a marijuana problem, like I'm all for it, man. Do it.
Well, especially at a surgical level, because they just demonstrated how surgical they could actually be at scale.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you're sending in, teams to take care of some business in remote areas in Mexico, it's going to be surgical, and
it is going to be surgical. And that's why they haven't been able to do anything before, because the Mexican army is not going to roll tanks down and squash fields. I mean, one, their corruption is incredibly rampant. The drug cartels would know ahead of time. Families would be killed. Generals would be threatened. It just wouldn't happen. But also, they don't have they just don't have the capability to do it. Whereas U.S. Special Forces Command and all of its enablers, oh my God, I mean, this is what they were built for. You build the intel package, you do the assessments, you do the reconnaissance, you put together your strikes. It'd be great to watch, man. And you publicize the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, it would be so Hollywood.
So stupid. It would be ridiculous. But so I want to bring this back just for a moment, if I may, and a saved round. I think, and I didn't talk about this earlier, but I am giving my opinion, of course. I think there's going to be a coup in Venezuela, and I think that it's almost inevitable because of the pressure that the administration is putting on that country, the lack of confidence in a couple of its senior leaders, and then like rats leaving a sinking ship, they're all going to turn on one another. The Venezuelan military has a very, very bloated senior officer corps. They have 2,000 generals and admirals, and it's built to prevent a coup. It undermines command efficiency, and it incentivizes loyalty over competence. And I think in this instance, under threat of arrest and sanctions of more people, I think they're going to turn on one another. And that's my prediction anyways. So we'll see.
Oh, for sure. That's definitely going to happen. There is no doubt about that. I mean, even if you just look at his security, his main security team surrounding him, they were Cuban because he doesn't even trust his own leadership,
No,
so
he doesn't.
So,
and that, yeah.
So if that's any indication right there, but I mean, that's par for the course when it comes to the removal of a dictator. It's going to spiral downward, which I think is actually part of the plan. I mean, I don't see how that could be ignored.
Well, yeah. And so he laid the groundwork for his own removal because he built this defense system that was entirely designed to keep him from being deposed, like a coup. But by disbanding his command structure, you eliminated coordination and communication between units, and it's terrible for integrated defense. So everything that he did was to keep him from being assassinated, but you decapitated your military's ability to defend itself when you did that. So he's really, I mean, I'm not surprised that he was taken as easily as he was, but some of that is on him. Yeah. They have some capable point defenses. The Venezuelan military has capable point defenses, but they struggle to assemble this coherent air and maritime defense picture quickly enough to contest the U.S. attack. It just happened so fast.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think there was any one. I mean, we say oil and all of that. I don't think that that was the, I think that there's a lot of benefits from, as far as the administration's viewpoint, is a lot of benefits from doing what they did. Because it, like you were saying, it sends a message to China and Russia. I mean, it sends a message to countries like Mexico. It sends a message to Cuba. It sends a message to Iran.
Yeah.
He's using it as a leverage point, obviously, for Greenland, just because of all of the rhetoric that's surrounding Greenland, like immediately following the action. So it, it, there's a lot of facets to this that will play out over time for sure.
There is. And so right now, the Kremlin is extremely jealous and humiliated because what we did in 24 hours was what they said they were going to do to Kiev. They did not do any of it. Whereas we knocked it out in 24 hours. We're coming up on 4 years of Ukraine. So Russia begrudgingly respects the shit out of what we did, but it's a horribly embarrassing reminder of their failures in any of their campaign.
Yeah, that is for sure. I mean, massive failures. And you start to look at the structure of their military and all of their command issues and, the training issues and all of the things that surround their infantry units. I'm sure they have special operators but comparative to what we have, it's, child's play.
There's no comparison. Yeah. And the other interesting thing, and I've spoken about this before, is that Russia and China are both communist countries. And they don't have an NCO corps. And without an NCO corps, you don't have an effective military. And I've said that before. And then today, I read an article that the Chinese PLA are recruiting NCOs. They've learned very, very, well, I don't want to say firsthand, but they have learned through multiple examples of history that without an NCO corps, you can't. You don't have an army, not a ground army anyways. And so they're trying to fix it. And I think that's fascinating.
It is super fascinating because, the rich history in the U.S., the NCO Corps, and it's really a nod to experience. It's like, experience is king when it comes to pretty much anything, combat especially. So if you've got
100%,
if you've got an officer corps that's leaning on the NCOs in the way that we do, and it just makes sense. And it's crazy to me that these other superpowers haven't done anything about that sooner.
Well, but you got to look at the ideology of said superpowers. So when you talk about Russia, again, communism. Talk about China, communism. They centralize control. Decisions have to be made at the top. The U.S. military heavily, and our Western allies as well, heavily decentralizes. We trust our non-commissioned officer corps with delivering that message to Garcia. Those two countries don't. And that, in the long run, in any protracted military campaign, will be their downfall. It absolutely will. China has us in numbers on every metric that is measurable. But what we have is, as you mentioned, experience, better training, and a decentralized command and control, which is fluid and flexible and able to adapt. And they don't have it.
Yeah, it is. It really is, I think, where ideology interferes with pragmatism. It's like, I think that, I guess that's the long and the short of it when it comes to this, because you would think when you have great minds that they would, especially with war, there's practical methodologies that just make sense. Why would you deviate from that? And that's the part where ideology is extremely problematic.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's going to be very telling over the next couple of months how things play out in Ukraine, what China does in response to our actions in Venezuela, and then what does the rest of Latin America do when a new government is put in place in Venezuela that is heavily pro-Western?
Yeah, again, it goes back to it is fascinating what it does to the world stage, because now it's in the back of everybody's mind, the capacity, our capacity to instill change in a very expedient
Yeah, but it's not
fashion.
just capacity. It's not just capacity, it's willingness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not just rhetoric, it
Yeah.
is action, and that action is now a seed that's been planted in everyone's mind, and it has a
Yep.
direct effect on you,
Yep.
like you were saying, Ukraine, the Iran situation. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. Trump today even said, uh, if they continue to kill protesters, that we will hit them and hit them very badly, like however he said it, however ridiculous way he said it. But
I don't see it happening.
no,
But
but
yeah.
I think that comes down to, what does Netanyahu want? Like I don't see regime change, but Netanyahu has been very vocal about Iran, as even as recently as today. So that'll be interesting to watch. I don't see him doing anything with that, unless Netanyahu says he wants him to bomb them. I could see him appeasing him in some way, shape, or form in that sense. But as far as like an invasion,
Mom.
no. Greenland is
Yeah, but I mean, what do you bomb? What do you target, and why? I mean, if you're talking about regime change, you can't bomb your way to regime change. It has to come from within, and there has to be fractures in the elite. There has to be fractures in the guard, and the only way you do that is if the existential threat is so great that it is life or limb for them not to capitulate.
Yeah, exactly. Well, but I think in that instance, the bombing would be more in vein of the enrichment capability, like all of the demands that Israel's put, like no Iranian enrichment capabilities, zero enrichment, all
Yeah.
enrichment uranium removed from Iran, and close and continuous oversight of Iranian nuclear facilities. So if I, I I do think that there's your excuse right there,
Right.
and I don't think that translates to regime change, but it does translate to action, and you know, uh, depending on how all of this starts to go, and then you get into Hezbollah again. It's just like,
Yeah.
it could be a, a catalyst for something to happen. Just because if you start to look at all of the air assets that have been moved into Europe, and you just look at what the rhetoric is going on right now, and it seems like
Right.
very plausible.
It could be. I think that there's a lot of blowback from doing something like that. But if it is seen by the experts in the intelligence community, the security advisors, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, as this is the time to strike. This is the pivotal tipping point where we could change Iran. Maybe. I wouldn't put it past them, especially in light of what's happened the last couple of days. But I don't feel that those indicators are there. I know that the protests in Iran are volatile, that the psychology has changed, but I don't think that we're at the tipping point where all we need is to just tip that first domino, and we've lost the theocracy. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I don't know. Time will tell. um,
Time will tell. And that's the beauty of being an armchair quarterback.
exactly. Just duration is the measure of truth. So as far as Greenland goes, I mean, that's an interesting topic. And what is your, like, knowing everything that you've discussed and knowing what's just happened in Venezuela, what do you actually think the intention is? Why has this become such a predominant topic?
I don't know. I don't know. I truly don't, because as I said, we have everything that we ever wanted already in place with these in agreements. So what more do you want? And again, I guess at the end of the day, it could come down to minerals, resources. And if that's truly the end game, like I said, I guess we're back to 19th century colonialism. And I just have to reassess my expectations. I didn't think that was us, but maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Yeah, I don't think that's, I think that the natural resources, the minerals, all of the things that, the mining, all of that stuff. We actually have in agreements, not just with the military side of things, but that is also something that has already been openly discussed and that we have have potential access to. So it's kind of in the same bucket as the military strategy. We had 18 bases there, and now we have one. And all of all that infrastructure is still in place. So we could easily just, go in and revitalize those assets. And
like we did in the Philippines.
So it really comes down to, and now Rubio is going to go to Denmark and talk about like the possible options, like direct sale or whatever it is.
Sale. Yeah, we're going to talk about buying Greenland.
And so what that leads me to believe in this instance, when we're talking about Trump and the bravado and all of the things that we've discussed, and it's been something that is kind of like seemingly popped up quite a bit with the administration from day one, is that I think it becomes more of an ego thing. He sees it as a valuable asset because it is, for all the reasons that it is that we've discussed. And he wants to increase the territory of the US and be the first president to do that in, a long ass time. And to me, that's the only answer right now that makes any sense.
Right. We'll see. My thought is, I think this is going to go away. I don't think this is going to last until February, but I could be absolutely mistaken. I don't know. I'm going to be, as we all are, keeping a close watch on this one. And if anything changes, yeah, we're going to talk about it. No doubt.
The only other thing I think would be worth mentioning is, what does this do to all of our, I feel like we're spreading ourselves. We have the potential to really spread ourselves pretty thin. And what does that do to the reserves?
Yeah.
To, burning through military reserves and, spreading ourselves thin.
I mean, the strike in Venezuela didn't use up too much of our anything, really. I mean, it used it up, but it didn't put us in the red. And anything else like the strikes in the Central Command, Somalia, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, that doesn't really do it either. What hurts us right now, at least, is our military industrial complex is not designed for volume. We are designed for quality, not quantity. Part of the reason why China is waiting until 2027 is so that it has time to manufacture the quantity of missiles that it needs to achieve its strategic goals of recovering Taiwan and bringing its state back together. And this is extremely important to the PLA. Well, not the PLA, to the PRC. I apologize. So for the United States, what I would like to see is an increase and a ramp up in production so that we are matched bullet for bullet, missile for missile with China in the next 2 years. Things like Venezuela, does it deplete our reserves? Not necessarily, but what does is we are providing a boatload of ordnance to Ukraine. And don't get me wrong, I think we should. I absolutely think we should. But we need to change. We need to change some of the ways that we're doing acquisitions, some of the ways we're doing procurement, and we need to realign some of our priorities. I mean, there's only so much money to go around. And this is, yeah. I don't think we're spread too thin yet. It depends on how many irons we decide to put in the fire.
Right. And there's a lot of them being discussed right now.
There's a lot of them being discussed, but we haven't necessarily pulled the trigger on them, and we'll see. I think that Ukraine has the potential to go, I don't want to say bad. That's not really what I'm trying to, I think Ukraine has the potential to be adjudicated. I think that there could be a ceasefire. I think there could be a peace accord. I don't think that they should abdicate their land to Russia. Fuck that. And if that's on the table, then keep fighting and we'll give them all the ordnance we need. But there are other, there's other hotspots that could. We're ramping things up in Nigeria. I don't know what that's going to look like, but we have it. I don't think we're depleting our reserves too strongly, but I also don't think that we're ramping it up as much as we should be, or as quickly as we should be is the better way to say that.
Yeah. Interesting times. That's all I got.
Yeah, my friend. All right. That sounds good. Well, then, I think we'll leave it there for the evening. As always, I am Brad Colbert, the Iceman, and that is everything that's fit to report. Until next time, stay frosty.
Improvise, adapt, and overcome.